So, inside the Lords this week, I've been quite busy with the police and crime bill, and I'm going to talk about that first because it gives you an indication of some of the things that go wrong when legislation's being made. I read in the newspapers a few weeks ago that there was going to be a new thing called Harper's Law. I think I read it a fortnight ago. And Harper's Law is a new law that will make it mandatory to have a life sentence for anyone who accidentally kills an emergency worker based on PC Harper's horrible death. And they wanted to toughen up the law. Somebody said it'll come up in the police and crime bill. I said, oh, it can't come up in the police and crime bill because we're at the report stage, so they couldn't bring it in that way. But guess what? They brought it in that way. So yesterday, the government tried to bring in a serious amendment to its own bill, which a few of us opposed on the basis that the process had been completely anti-democratic, not gone through the House of Commons, not been discussed anywhere else, and was announced by press release. The Labour Party stood up and said, we support the government on Harper's bill, but now we've heard a few arguments, we're not sure. And it was amusing because we had basically a rebellion against the government in which the Labour Party were arguing amongst themselves because they realised they had basically been so keen to not look as though they were, not the big law and order party, that they were prepared to put through a completely illiberal bill. Some people will say, well, life sentences for people who kill emergency workers is justifiable. And maybe it is, but it's a big change. This is for manslaughter. Life sentences for manslaughter is mandated, is a big discussion. Not just crowbar it in, say there's no time to discuss it. So I was glad at least that there was a rebellion, even though that rebellion didn't work. You'll be bemused to know that in the course of the police and crime bill discussion so far, at the end of last night, when I was there very late in Parliament, I had a liaison with the Lib Dems, and they said, we've got to stop agreeing like this. And in case you think that I'm about to join the Lib Dems, it is true that on the police and crime bill, I will largely agree with them, as I said. I pointed out that on things like law and order, I am quite liberal, and it was just a shame that the Lib Dems weren't liberal on everything else, which at least got a laugh from them. But I probably will be having some united front with the Lib Dems on occasion. The Labour Party are completely inconsistent on everything, so God knows. That will carry on, and some of the bans on protests and so on will carry on into next week if Parliament's allowed to sit, and probably into the new year. If Parliament's allowed to sit is because we have now had a change in the status of the pandemic, with the new variant being used to introduce Plan B. And I just wanted to make some observations. Yesterday I was viscerally furious. I wasn't even so much furious about the party and the press conference, the mock press conference, and Allegra Stratton and so on, although the contempt that it indicated towards ordinary people who had really gut-wrenchingly had Christmas cruelly snatched from them last year, and now we were seeing this kind of jokey, but we'll carry on having our parties. But because throughout the week there'd been a number of indications of the collateral damage of lockdown policies. When you think about what happened to that 6-year-old little boy, Arthur, that was not caused by COVID. That was the direct responsibility for it are indeed the stepmother and the father, who I am glad have gone to jail for a very long time and deserve to, and not an iota of sympathy to them. But when you imagine that the grandfather and the uncle and that various members of the family went to the police and tried to report it, and the police told them if they visited they would be breaking COVID restrictions, when you think that social services were so accustomed to working from home that they were discombobulated and didn't respond to the urgent SOS calls from the family about that 6-year-old, then you can say that there is a cost to pay when you have antisocial restrictions. Then we heard about what happened in relation to Afghanistan, and the leaked memorandums has indicated that Foreign Office civil servants were working from home, and as a consequence of working from home they didn't have access to all of the computer material that they would have done if they were in the office, and basically treated the withdrawal from Afghanistan like it was kind of work-a-day thing that you have to sort out, but all a bit inconvenient, and they were all working from home. So the sense of urgency that one might get from being in the office as the Foreign Office civil service, that would make you think, my God, we've got a crisis and an emergency in Afghanistan, we've all got pulled together and work every hour there is, was lost. And as a consequence of that, at least part of the consequence was that the Afghanistan withdrawal was messy. Regardless of what you think of the politics of whether we were in or why we were in Afghanistan or whether we should have got out, the unforgivable thing was that lives were lost, lives destroyed, people who were promised that they'd be got out weren't got out because of working from home. We then get to a situation where it becomes revealed that there was Christmas parties a go-go around Westminster and particularly around Number 10. And the government's response to this is to bring in work from home orders, which I've just said there is a cost to, effectively disrupting the Christmas plans of many people who have been going to work and wanted to go out for Christmas parties, and although they're not banning Christmas parties, you're all working from home, it ruins it. Bringing in some incredibly onerous and irrational travel bans on red list countries. You know, there is a degree of jingoism in relation to this. You know, the Africans can't be allowed in because they're the ones who are responsible for the new variant, which we now know is not true even, but it doesn't stop them putting Nigeria as an addition on the red list. Thousands of Nigerians live in this country, were planning to go to Nigeria for Christmas or have their relatives over, and they now can't. But all sorts of travel plans ruined. They say all you have to do is to take tests and it'll all be fine for European travel. They cost money. People are already worried about money. So with a complete cavalier disregard to anything, they also bring in a form of vaccine passport, which they were supposedly not going to do, which, as we know, is already pretty dubious in terms of liberal and freedom issues. But finally, in typically cavalier fashion, Boris Johnson says there should be a big debate about mandating vaccines for everyone, something which only last week was ruled off the table as, you know, the rest of Europe might be doing it, but we're not going to be doing it. So I suppose that my experience of inside the Lords and the fact that they try and crowbar things in something so important into the police and crime bill in the way that they do, completely not even pretending to play the democratic process, even in an anti-democratic house like the House of Lords. The fact that the way that you get out of the fact that you've been found out to have been endorsing people rule breaking in your midst is to immediately use this virus and COVID as a way of gaining authority by then having that press conference in front of the nation and saying, we need to now tell you what to do again. They are going to, I think this government, and not just the government but those who support it, are going to be in a situation where they really do create a very nihilistic cynicism amongst the public for the political process. This is not good. I don't want the Tories to lose power based on parties, by the way, in case you think that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that every time there's a revelation about what's going on, you become more cynical, and I become cynical. I have to stop myself getting to a point where I think everything they say is made up or a lie. There was only a very brief time in the House of Lords yesterday in which we could discuss the COVID situation. A statement was made by the Health Minister. I actually had 30 seconds, which I didn't make good use of, I have to say, because I was so mad. I kind of just basically said I was seething and something. You can watch that. I was just so furious that they cancelled Christmas last year for everyone else, but not people they knew. But what was most shocking was that the Labour Party and the Lib Dems and the Tory backbenchers sat in there in the House of Lords. They had longer time because they're front benchers and so on. And they basically said to the government, why have you brought these regulations in too late? Why aren't they harder? Why aren't there mask mandates everywhere you go? Even though, in fact, they've extended mask wearing everywhere you go. No criticism at all. And then you just think, every single one of the political parties have to take responsibility for the collateral damage of only seeing everything through COVID eyes and the terrible potential consequences for society of that. And I will make the case next week if we have a debate on it, but God knows they might close Parliament down early in this context, of making the point that people are going to become quite anti-science as well, and I'm very enthusiastic about scientific endeavour, enthusiastic about the vaccine. But if the vaccine becomes turned into a political weapon that's used by the government to assert its authority over us, and they make it mandated and therefore not something that people choose, if they bring in enforced medical interventions and so on, that's going to lead to people becoming cynical about science per se, and that's a very bad outcome from all this. Just finally on what I've been doing inside the Lords, I'm really delighted that the Archbishop of Canterbury has put down a motion on free speech tomorrow, so I'm definitely looking forward to speaking on that. And the atmosphere in the Lords is actually, despite everything I've just said, is one in which there's quite a lot of people around and there's quite a lot of talking about politics, and that part of being in the Lords I really enjoy. And I'm really glad that some members of the House of Lords are now identifying that there are groups of us who are interested in freedom, interested in free speech. And there's also a cross-party pandemic and recovery group, which is cross-party and cross-houses, so I got together with those MPs and peers who want to raise questions. So whilst it's not an ideal platform for being involved in politics, it's a platform in which political debates can happen. So I now have to have a pause while I look in my bag. As always, what I'm always proudest of politically is not what's happened inside the Lords, but what's happened outside the Lords, and particularly what the Academy of Ideas is doing. So, Christmas is coming. We have our new Letters on Liberty that I mentioned before, and here they are, hot off the press. Let me recommend Toxic Sociability, Sociality even, Reflections on a Pandemic by Josie Appleton. It's absolutely brilliantly written. If ever there was the for the moment read that you should read, you must read this. It's Christmas, so we have to think about unwinding a little, maybe reading a novel, and if you're not convinced, you're going to read The Seductive Power of Literature by Phil Harrison, which is almost a kind of literary work in itself. They're a short read, but it really is why literature can set you free. And then a brilliant historic take on the liberating power of education by Harley Richardson, who's involved in the Academy of Ideas Education Forum. And I'm a former teacher. I love the education debate. I think I know my history on education, but I read this and it was a tonic, and I learned a lot as well. These are really a must present for yourself. You must buy them for your nearest and dearest as stocking fillers. Even better if you buy the whole back catalogue, which is we're doing a very cheap deal on for Christmas, or that you buy your nearest and dearest and anyone who's interested in freedom, or anyone you want to convince that freedom is really important, you buy them a subscription for the year ahead. So inside the Lords, interesting things happening, keep your eye on it. Outside the Lord, where the real world lives, one of the contributions to that real world debate about what really matters, because we certainly can't rely on politicians, is to take control of our own destiny, learn how to fight for freedom, and Letters on Liberty is a modest contribution to that, so you should definitely read these three.